We are live. The first episode of the Big 12 Roundtable, aka the 8gents of chaos. Thanks, Levi, for that wonderful group name. I am Jamie Plunkett, one of the managing editors of Frogs of War, and these are three other incredible people who are fully capable of introducing themselves. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing here. But Melissa, why don't you start, and we'll kind of go around and introduce ourselves.
I am Melissa Triebwasser, the other half of the managing editor team of Frogs of War. So awesome to be here. I'm going to throw it down to Levi because that just seems to be the order that we're going in.
I'm Levi Stevenson. I'm the managing editor for Wide Right and Natty Light, which is the Iowa State SB Nation site.
And my name is Shehan Jeyarajah, and I am a national college football writer over at CBS Sports now as of 2 weeks ago.
Shehan, how good does that feel to say? Yeah, like national. We're just the little blog boys and girls. It's like national college football writer.
This is actually my parents' basement.
Yeah, I mean, I won't lie. It feels pretty good. I did an interview, like a radio interview, the first week, and they introduced me like that, and it's like, oh, that's weird. That's
real.
That's
That's something.
That's weird.
I know you're feeling good about yourself, but I swear Jamie and I had fans at the last tailgate that I was at. So I mean, like you might be a big deal, but
isn't it always the weirdest thing when someone comes to up to your tailgate? You don't know them, but they know you, and you're like, oh, he's like, hey, watch you guys, read you guys stuff. Whatever. You're like, okay, hope he didn't read my shit.
It's always funny, right? Because you, especially when you see people who are like thinking about saying hi to you, and you're just like, just say hi. It's not a big deal. Don't worry. Like I love getting to meet people, obviously, who like read my stuff. I mean, heck, to some extent, right? Like all of us kind of met because we're like, hey, let's go say hi to each other in a press box or something, right? So yes, if you do catch any of us, I don't want to speak for everybody, but yes, it's always fun to get to meet people who read.
I wouldn't meet me in person.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to ruin the aura of Levi.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Especially on Iowa State game day.
Yeah. I will just say that I'm nowhere near famous enough to be annoyed by people wanting to talk to me yet. So, and we'll never get there. So, yeah, please make me feel important for 8 seconds of my life. It means a lot to me.
And you're probably approaching us because you want to talk about something that we're obviously really interested in. And so what better way to start a conversation?
UTEP football.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
Shehan, the famous Miner fan.
The biggest Miner fan who has no reason to be a Miner.
Which still might make you the biggest Miner fan.
Which someone may make you the major fan.
The only. Oh my gosh.
All right.
Listen, I gotta go. I got things to do.
This is off to a really, really awesome start. So this is the Big 12 Roundtable. This is going to be a once a month live video podcast on the Frogs War Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter accounts. We're going to be bringing on special guests to talk college football, Big 12, and some national stories every month. And this is the first attempt at that. We're already off to a fantastic start. But y'all, there is so much to get into. We promised you guys that this would be at least like just 1 hour at most. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first story, which really truly is my favorite thing to talk about. And that is Texas football suffering and losing and doing so in fantastic fashion. 333 rushing yards by the Arkansas offense. It's the first time Texas has allowed 300 plus rushing yards since November 25th, 2016, when TCU Horned Frogs ran for over 300 yards in their win against the Longhorns. Guys, when you watched this game on Saturday night, what were some things that you took away from the Texas loss and just that whole game in general?
I mean, I just want to say Steve Sarkisian is a brilliant genius because this was all part of his master plan, according to Orange Bloods and to our friends at Burnt Orange Nation. So, I mean, what a motivating factor just to get your ass ran by the 11th best team in the SEC. Like, could not set himself up better for success. So what a genius. Like, this guy's everything we thought he was.
I think it's surprising to because obviously that this is a team that has recruited well in the trenches. I think has some really nice pieces on the defensive line, and they just looked like a JV team in the trenches on that day. And it's one of those things, right? Because I've had people ask me a lot about this, like, what was that? Like, why did this happen? How do we have these good players? And obviously the sort of answer that you hear from everybody is like, oh, well, it's the SEC, but like Arkansas is not one of those teams, right? Like it shouldn't happen like this. But I think that this is one of the trends that we've seen with Texas, like in the last decade, right? Is that there is sort of I don't want to overstate, right? But like there is a certain level of like entitlement, of expectation. And I'm sure after week 1, right? Like after you beat Louisiana, who has a really good offensive and defensive line, maybe you're kind of feeling yourself a little too much, right? And this is an Arkansas team. I think it's important to remember this was a team that was in the Southwest Conference. This is a team whose fan base absolutely hates the University of Texas. This was a big rivalry game for them too. And I think that really fed into everything. And so you have a team, which by the way is kind of how TCU has done this last couple of years. You have a team in Texas who comes in expecting to win and just gets physically beat up. I mean, it was so weird to see, but it turns out Texas is not back.
Which means they're actually back.
Breaking news.
Here's the thing. So full disclosure, my dad is a big Razorback fan. I grew up calling the Hogs. So this was personally really nice to see on Saturday night for a couple different reasons. But I'll say this about the Arkansas coaching staff is that if they have any unit on that field ready to play, it's the offensive and defensive lines. Everything for that football team starts in the trenches. And while Texas is still obviously a few years away from joining the SEC, recruiting is going to pick up just like we've seen with A&M. We're going to see them start to get those SEC bodies that will allow them to compete. But right now, I think this game was more than anything else an example of how set apart even the lower tier SEC schools are from a trenches standpoint than even a Texas, who recruits historically really, really well.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll mention too is that, Sam Pittman, their head coach, is an old offensive line coach. We were surprised when he did get that job. But, when you're coaching offensive linemen, like he did at Arkansas when they really had a lot of their success, and then also at Georgia when they really had their rise, it's like you have to instill a mentality, right? Having talent is good, but it really is kind of about like that mentality of I'm going to win this matchup. I'm going to dominate this guy. And, I think that's an attitude that, yes, obviously was there in the trenches, but I think kind of permeated the whole team in a lot of ways in that game against Texas. And so, again, I mean, this all sounds like cliches, but this stuff really does matter when you do have players who are used to physicality, that want to beat you up, that want to attack you. And so I think that sort of thing sometimes can even make up for talents.
Well, and I don't think we should let them off the hook, though. They lost to a bad Arkansas team, a team in Arkansas that has fewer wins over the last 5 years than Texas Tech does. And we can say that because they're not represented on the pod. But I mean, it's not like that they're not recruiting talent. Now, I understand the style of play, and I understand, but also like let's also not act like that this is the 3 yards in a cloud of dust SEC of the past either. That these teams, and maybe Arkansas isn't as aggressive as some of these other teams, but a lot of these teams are putting in spread concepts and air raid concepts and different things like that. And so I think that this was just a matter of they rolled into town, thought that they were ready to go based on what they did in week 1, and they clearly were not ready to go and got physically dominated. Yes, not for a lack of talent, not for a lack of coaching. I mean, it's not like Steve Sarkisian's coming from a program that didn't develop the lines maybe better than anyone else in the country. They just flat out got beat. And I don't know that even 2 to 3 years of the SEC is going to change Texas from being a program who has their fans tweet things like the way to avoid Arkansas fans after a loss is to go to the nicest bar in the nicest hotel in town. This mentality is not going to change when you join the SEC. They're just going to be able to justify their ineptitude even better because now they're losing to SEC teams instead of to Kansas State.
When you look at the people that Nick Saban that have come out of the Nick Saban Coach Rehabilitation Center over there in Tuscaloosa, what makes Nick Saban great though? There's lots of programs that can recruit really well. Not as good as Alabama, but getting pretty close there. Like Texas. Texas does that pretty well. What Nick Saban does better than anybody else is he combines the recruiting of Texas and the culture that like Matt Campbell talks about. He combines those two and turns them into this unstoppable football juggernaut that almost nobody can touch. Ohio State gets kind of close because they do something kind of similar, maybe just to a very slightly lesser degree. But Stark's got to pull that the culture thing that makes Saban great that takes a long time to install. I'm not saying he can or cannot or will not do it at Texas, but that is not an overnight transformation in the slightest. Because right now you have an entire roster of Texas Longhorns that are still that grew up in the Tom Herman way of doing things, which is clearly not a good way of doing things, for a number of reasons. But so if Sark truly took all of his big notebook that he got from Nick Saban and took it to Texas, even if he has that, it is not an overnight change. It's not a 1 year change. It's not a 2 year change. It's a 3+ year change. It's not going to be an overnight thing. So, I mean, I personally would like to see Texas never win again, but that's not my call. And especially because they're not going to be in the Big 12 anymore, and I do not care about them tanking anybody's reputation. But that's kind of the thing is they were so ingrained in this culture that caused them to lose a lot of these games for 10 years. It's so deeply embedded in the Texas program right now. You can't just uproot that on a whim. It takes time. And Sark seems like he's a pretty good dude. Seems like he's kind of got himself squared away and all that. So it seems like he can do it, but it takes time.
I think there's a good segue here talking about the coach in his first year at the University of Texas, one of the newest head coaches of one of the biggest programs in the country, to the longest tenured football coach in college football.
Oh,
Kirk
Jamie,
the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Don't do him like that, man.
They had a very big win over an incredible rival. Finish that beer, Levi. You burned it. 27-17 over Iowa State. Before we get into all of the details of the game, which we will go to excruciating detail for Levi State. Levi, you were there. It was game day. Ames was rocking.
Yep.
Give us your 30-second recap of that football game.
Of the game? Iowa taught us why special teams still matter. And it showed us that turnovers never didn't matter, and nobody ever thought that they didn't matter. But we found out that you can win a football game with literally just turnovers and special teams and nothing else. No offense, no defense, doesn't matter. And what that did was exposed a great weakness of Iowa State that has been there since really, honestly, since Paul Rhodes left during the Matt Campbell era, is special teams. They got one piece of it taken care of with the kickoffs. That's awesome. That's one part of it that's taken care of. But the problem is that the punt team is still a hot, fiery disaster, and it's not good on either end. And that exposed itself big time. Iowa State had Tory Taylor, or had Iowa backed up to their own, 5-yard line. Something. Tory Taylor was punting from his goal line, and he punted it, and it was a really nice kick. Tariq Milton's back there, and he just inexplicably lets it drop to the ground, and it gets a crazy 30-yard kick to the opposite 15-yard line. It resulted in like an 80-yard punt because of a terrible, terrible, terrible mental error on special teams, not all dissimilar from the one that ended the game in 2019. And I'm hoping that they are using this as a fulcrum, like they did the Notre Dame Camping World Bowl, and saying this is obviously something that needs to change, and you make a very tangible, immediate change to fix the problem. And I hope they do that. I don't know if they will, but I hope they do, because if Iowa State can get the special teams figured out, you have a defense that is stupid good, and you have a special teams that's at least pretty decent. Your offense you can withstand offensive fluctuations and still be fine.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway from this game on Saturday was that Iowa State probably has the best defense in the Big 12 this year. To be able to come out and give a performance like that in spite of the mental errors on special teams, to play in front of a rocking crowd like that, to totally shut down Iowa's offense for the most part. I don't think there's really, other than the loss column impact of this game, I don't think there's really anything negative to take away as far as Iowa State's Big 12 chances go. The defense is somehow better than I thought it would be. Like, I thought it would be really good, but it's actually somehow better than I thought it would be. The second half, they held Iowa to 0.9 yards per play. 0.9. 28 plays, 23 yards of offense in the entirety of the second half, including -6 yards rushing in the third quarter. It's Iowa. Iowa runs the shit out of the ball, and they're really good at it. And Iowa State held them to -6 yards in a quarter, and like 23, and like what was it, like
11 yards in the second half. John Haycock has the right that nobody would have complained if he went up to and just punched Tom Manning in the face after the game for wasting that defensive effort. It was one of the most dominating defensive performances I've ever seen out of an Iowa State team, and it just didn't matter because the special teams and offense was so bad.
Shehan, from a national perspective, when you have a game like this that's got game day, it's an in-state rivalry, it's two conferences, one of which has been in an incredible amount of turmoil over the last 3 or 4 months. What does it do not only for Iowa State, but for the reputation of the Big 12 to lose a game like this on the national stage? And what does it say that Iowa State managed to go in and win a game like this?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I was going to be one of those teams this year, right? Like I was going to be a team. I mean, you see that the fact that they beat Iowa State the way that they did, in fact, even though they only had 170 something yards of offense, right? Like that has them in the top 5. That's the way that people see Iowa State this year. That's what going into Ames and beating Iowa State means. Now that's not much solace, but it is some solace, right? I mean, people know that Iowa State is a very good team. Yeah. the thing
I feel better now.
The thing you do have to say about that, right, is that from a national perspective for Iowa State, it means that they're not allowed to mess up again at all. And that means to be in that playoff conversation, they've probably got to beat Oklahoma twice, right? Like that's probably what it's going to take. And that's the toughest part about all this, right? Because like if they win this game and lose to Oklahoma early in the year, you still go into a Big 12 championship game with that probably being a play-in game to the college football playoff. So that's going to be a lot tougher just to beat them twice. I mean, it's really hard to beat a team twice, no matter which team it is. And so that's the part that's unfortunate. I think for Iowa, right? Like Iowa, again, they're going to be one of those teams, especially with Ohio State looking a little shaky. I think that they're suddenly looking like Big Ten potential. I don't want to say favorites because Ohio State's still Ohio State, but like they're going to be clearly
that defense is good enough that they can score. If their offense puts up 17 points, they're going to win 11 games. That defense is crazy good.
And the thing is too, right? Because like you mentioned, watching Iowa, I mean, because I haven't watched a whole lot of Big Ten football other than like the top teams.
Nobody
right?
does voluntarily.
It's because you care about your
it's typically used if it's typically used if like the CIA's after you and they want to find out something. They got some dirt on you and they want to find out something or whatever. Then they just stick you in a room and they tie you to a chair. And they're like, here, you got to watch Iowa Penn State.
And like so. All that to say, right, because I'm from Texas. I primarily watch the Big 12. I obviously watch a lot of SEC too, just being in that region. And so, like, watching Iowa is like an out-of-body experience.
It's weird. It's super weird, isn't it?
I was doing the CBS live blog, right? So providing live updates from the game. And, like, at one point, I just, like, messaged my, the Slack chat that we're in. And I'm like, how many times am I allowed to say – they went 3-0? Like, how many times am I allowed to give an update that says nothing?
Yeah, Twitter's like, you repeated this tweet 7 times in the last 5 minutes.
You can't tweet this.
Right.
You just tweeted this.
Like the fourth punt of the game came with like 12 minutes left in the first quarter.
Right. and so, like, because I did notice just a little bit, right? Like, not many people were tweeting about the Iowa State game. And it's kind of like, there's nothing to tweet about. And, like, so once there was a turnover, all of a sudden all the tweets came, right? So people were watching the game, but like it was just the weirdest thing. And so the thing about Iowa right now is that in their first 2 games, they've had a cornerback get 2 interceptions in each of their first 2 games. Riley Moss in the first game, Matt Hankins in the second game. What is that? This is not anything that like I've ever seen in my life before, right? Like this is not Alabama like back then. They're not even doing stuff like that, right? So like that's the one thing in Ohio State, and when you look at their quarterback CJ Stroud, like he has been mistake prone. Nobody's really made him pay for it. They made Ohio State pay for it. Obviously, Oregon did, but like there is a world where like CJ Stroud throws like 4 interceptions against Iowa and it just goes bad.
Most people don't know, actually, Iowa leads all teams in interceptions in the last 5 years by a wide margin. Like it's not even close.
Sense.
Like they destroy people in turnovers. And that's like one of the reasons that makes that defense really dangerous to play is that because Iowa doesn't really turn the ball over very much as it is on their own. And when you combine with the fact that a defense that produces a tremendous amount of turnovers, that makes it impossible to play them. It's a terrible matchup for anybody because you just physically cannot afford to mess up because they turn you over, they don't turn it over, and they will punch you out of existence And it is the worst possible way to lose a game. It is miserable losing to Iowa.
Levi, are you okay? Are you all right?
So, okay. If you'd asked me that question an hour after the game ended, I would have been very not okay. I was not okay. I was not in a good headspace at all. Now I've made peace with it. I think I've made peace with it. I understand that we still got a good defense. They're still stupid good. Like legitimately outside of like the very top end of the Blue Bloods, Iowa and Iowa State may have 2 of the top 5 defenses in college football, which is the most benign, which is crazy. So you got that. We still got Breece Hall. He's still really good. We still got Charlie Kohler, even if he is kind of dinged up and seems like he might be dinged up for a while. You still got Xavier Hutchins. You still got fun stuff going on. It's just I don't like losing to Iowa.
Well, this kind of brings me to the point that I wanted to make, and I want to point out before I ask this question that I was worried about Levi specifically heading into this game when week 1, when he was about 17 beers deep by 11 a.m. and he was texting me how excited he was about touchbacks. Like that's when I knew.
Dude, I lost my goddamn mind.
Yeah.
When the first one went out of the back of the end zone, I lost it.
Yeah. So that's when I figured Iowa State might have some issues to address. You mentioned all those fun toys on offense and all those great things, and you very specifically left a name off.
Yeah,
and
I did.
My question is, I'm assuming Brock Purdy regains the starting role, but this is the biggest controversy potentially that Matt Campbell has had to deal with in program. What are you kind of hearing about what the future of the quarterback position is for the Cyclones?
A couple things to unpack there, actually. So the first one is that like Brock Purdy's still the starter. We do know he's a little bit banged up. His shoulder. He took a hit in the UNI game that has his shoulder a little sore, but obviously he struggled. He's going now to play on a turf field indoors against maybe the worst team in the entirety of Division I football, including FCS. Their UNLV is really bad. And if you can't get it going,
hey, that's Justin Rogers' UNLV team. So we don't
Not really.
Justin Rogers.
Justin. Oh my God.
I believe it's Tate Martell's team, actually.
Hey,
no. Yeah.
Hold up a minute. I don't know if you were watching the first quarter when they played against Arizona State, but they looked okay.
But if you can't get it going in that situation, something is wrong. And there's a part of the other factor behind this is that the guy that's behind him, Hunter Deckers, has played 3 times in his career and he's looked extremely good in all 3 of them. He completed 11 passes last Saturday and they all looked really good. They're all right on time. They're all well delivered. He stood in the pocket like a champ.
Levi, you do not want to be in this position as a
Hold
top
on.
10 team.
Hold
you
on.
You do not want this.
Hold on. Okay, so when you said that this was one of the biggest controversies of the Matt Campbell era, people forget that Iowa State is now on the 4th quarterback of the Matt Campbell era because it started out with Joel Lanning, and then it started out with Jacob Park, which that was a train wreck. And then it went to Kyle Kempt, which ended up like he was good and he just lost his job because he got hurt and Brock Purdy showed up or whatever. But as quarterback controversies go, having to figure out a way to bench the greatest quarterback in school history for a guy that's probably going to be better is kind of an odd one, but I wouldn't call it necessarily a bad one. But the answer is Brock Purdy will start against UNLV, barring some crazy freak injury this week. He will start. As long as he doesn't suck, he'll play. That's it. If he struggles, we have a different conversation to be had. But he got pulled out. It was Matt Campbell said in his presser on Saturday, Tuesday. They pulled Brock because he needed a time to step back. For the same reason that Spencer Rattler got pulled against Texas last year. He needed to step back and recollect himself. It worked out. Hunter Deckers got some really good snaps, all this, and he's the guy after Brock Purdy, and he's got a long time to play yet. He's just a redshirt freshman, so he's the dude after Purdy. So you want to get him snaps when you can. He needed to do that. That's where it currently sits. If Hunter Deckers has to play, you're not really going to find an Iowa State fan that's all that worried about it. But it's still Brock Purdy. He's still the greatest quarterback we've ever had. You would like to see him finish his career the way Brock Purdy deserves to finish his career. So that's kind of where it's at.
I think that's fair. When you have a legend like Purdy,
Right.
You want to see that storybook end the way that it should.
Right.
It's the way that TCU fans got to see Andy Dalton's career finish. Right. It's the way that we almost got to see Trevon Boykin's career finish before he made some horrible decisions. And, you know, we're not going to get into all of that.
Yeah.
But I think even non-Iowa State fans can understand that desire for Iowa State fans. But if it comes down to it, and you
got to win football games.
We're 7 games into the season, and Iowa State is struggling on offense. What does Matt Campbell do if he knows he's got a backup that's capable of moving this offense down the field?
And that's the point. Is that like if Brock Purdy's gonna get it going, he's got to get it going this weekend in the most perfect conditions he could ask for, as far as getting an offense going. And I don't know what happens. I think it does fine because UNLV again is very, very bad. But it's going to be a home crowd. Let's not forget that it's basically a home game because there's going to be I would guess probably in the neighborhood about 25,000 Iowa State fans making the trip out to Las Vegas, including myself. So he's he has to get it going this weekend. If he doesn't, I mean, how long can you reasonably struggle and be like, and just give him the benefit of the doubt because he did something really good for you, for the last few years. You got to win football games. That you can't waste this team. You can't. There's young guys down the line, but next year is probably expected to be at least somewhat of a rebuilding year or whatever, because you're losing a ton of guys. You just can't waste this team, especially this defense, when you're going to lose a lot of them after this year. You can't take that chance of losing this defense. And so you just can't sit on Brock forever and wait for him to figure it out against Oklahoma in the 10th game and the 11th game of the season. You just can't.
Yeah.
And that's just the matter of fact. And I can't imagine Brock would take that personally or anything like that. I mean, it's his own deal. He's got to get it figured out. And that's just part of it.
He's got to get it figured out. He's got to get healthy. And we all know that Iowa State is at their best when Brock Purdy is healthy, for sure.
100%.
For sure. Moving on, though, Kansas State lost Skylar Thompson to what looks like a pretty significant injury in their close win over Southern Illinois on Saturday. This is a team that consistently rises up and has one or two surprise wins. They've always got a pretty good defense. Typically runs in the middle of the pack in the Big 12. How bad do you guys see things getting for Kansas State if Thompson is not able to come back?
We saw last season.
True.
It wasn't good.
Yeah. I think they were talking after the game. They expected maybe, he's just out for a few games, and now he's been given the dreaded out indefinitely. And their backup, Will, what's his last name?
Will Howard.
Will Howard. It's so bad.
He's not good. I mean, he tries. You can tell he puts a lot of effort in it. He tries. Yeah. He tries really hard, but that's not meant to be sarcastically demeaning. I mean, he legitimately looks like he plays really hard. He just doesn't have it.
Yeah. And he can't throw the ball and he can't run. And though he did break off, I think, a 50-yarder against TCU, if I remember correctly. It was the saddest.
I don't want to remember
the saddest 50-yard quarterback run I've ever seen. I thought I could have caught him from the press box before a TCU defender did, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it was mostly there.
Yeah, it's you look at who Will Howard beat last year, right? He beat Texas Tech, Kansas, TCU, 3 comparable teams, and then lost the final 5 to end the year. So, I mean, I think that in all seriousness, right, he has not been good. They've really struggled. They've been a completely different team when Skylar is in the lineup. And so it sucks, right? That's the biggest thing about it, is it just sucks. This is a 6th-year player. He's waited his chance for so many for so many years. I will say, obviously, it's tough at this point that Will Howard is the guy that you have to go to when you've kind of seen what he can do and seen that it's not great. But this is, I didn't want to overstate what having Skylar back would mean for this team, because I still think this team is probably a little above average. I don't think they're awesome with him or anything like that, but I mean, it changes everything. Just having a guy who can execute, right? Because it's really not that Skylar's so good. It's that the gap between 1 and 2 is that big. And I think that we saw that so much last year.
I've always enjoyed watching Skylar Thompson play. I've always kind of been just a secret fan of his a little bit. But also part of his deal is he takes a lot of pressure off Deuce Vaughn. Because last year when he was out and it was just Deuce Vaughn, he did nothing. Deuce Vaughn did almost nothing after Skylar Thompson went down. And that basically completely stalled out their offense. I mean, their defense is it's solid, but it's not a game. It's not a defense that can win you a game by itself. or whatever. I mean, and when you can't rely on Deuce Vaughn to go do his thing, that's a huge problem.
And that's incredibly disappointing too, just because Deuce Vaughn is so fun to watch.
Yeah,
like that. He's just such an incredible runner. He makes people miss. He always has big playability. And if you lose that other aspect of your offense and he can't do what he does, then Kansas State not only just becomes a worse football team, they become less fun to watch, which is really disappointing for Kansas State fans.
Well, and that's the issue too, is that when you're Kansas State and you're building off of mostly 2- and 3-star guys and guys that weren't highly recruited, then you need to hit on one of these kind of lightning in a bottle players. And Skylar Thompson has absolutely been that for them. He's not an elite passer, but he's like the veteran Max Duggan, right? And that he just finds ways to make plays more often than not that puts his team in a position.
He's good enough. He's always good enough for whatever situation you need him to be in. He's good enough. Yeah.
And they're not going to necessarily contend for Big 12 championships, but like Jamie was saying in the beginning, they're going to beat a couple teams they shouldn't. They're going to win games that you don't expect them to win, and they're going to be a pretty good team that gets to a decent bowl and keeps their fan base engaged.
Mm-hmm. You know, and I think we're talking about all of this too in the context of a really shaky Big 12 conference that doesn't know what the long-term future is for all of these 8 teams. And so I think this year, more than years past, at least from my perspective, I want to see all of these teams do well, especially in their non-conference games. I want to see people stay healthy because really right now it feels like we're all more dependent on each other than we have been in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of those things where I still like, there's still certain teams that I like when I look up at halftime and it's a close game that shouldn't be. But at the end of the day, no, I think you're absolutely right. Is that we need to, the conference from the outside needs to show people that they're competitive, that these 8 teams still belong in the national conversation and still deserve a seat at the table when it comes to, voting rights and playoff bids when that all changes here in the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And now that we've said this really nice affirming thing about all of these schools, let's rank them and say which one is the worst. Let's start with the bottom.
Kansas. Okay, next one.
Okay, Kansas. So let's do this
for Kansas. Yes.
We'll give me each of your bottom 4, and then we'll do the middle 3, and then we'll do the top 3, kind of working our way up from 10 to 1.
So are we ranking within the bottom 4 or just picking a bottom 4?
Rank them within the bottom 4, and then we'll kind of
that's different. Yeah.
So bottom 3, because we all agree on number 10.
All right. So right? Kansas is last.
Yeah, Kansas is 10. Yeah.
All right. So give me your next 3 after Kansas. Shehan, you want to go first?
So I am very annoyed that I have to answer this one 9 because I've been very high on them all off season long. What the hell was that, Texas Tech?
That was my 9. That was my 9 too. I was not as high on Texas Tech as you because I saw Tyler Shuck play in the Fiesta Bowl and he was not good. So I didn't see the ceiling on Tyler Shuck that maybe other people did. But.
I just think more than that. I saw Tech's quarterbacks play the last 2 years and was like, okay,
it can't be worse.
And so they were not impressive. I will say they did look great against Houston in the second half. So maybe it's a mirage. Maybe it's going to be okay. But I just think it's hard to have them anywhere. But 9th right now, 8th. Same deal. What the hell is that, Oklahoma State? What is going on? I don't understand. The first 2 weeks, obviously playing against a team or against an FCS team, struggling against them. The second week, going against a team that lost to an FCS team and struggling against them. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand how this offense has such little identity. I know that our good friend Philip over at the 10-12 podcast put together a drive chart of when they were in 2nd and long, here's the embarrassing stuff that they did. And they just kept going run for two every time they faced 2nd and 9, right? And so I don't know if it's play calling. I don't know if it's cultural development. They obviously aren't good enough right now at tackle. They're obviously not good enough right now at running back. They don't have a game breaker at receiver to really change things up. And they're going to waste one of the better defenses in the Big 12 doing this. So just inexplicable to me. The team that I'll have next, I was not high on this team coming into the year, and they've kind of lived up to it. West Virginia, I just don't see the vision on them. I think that their offense looks like a disaster right now. I think that defensively they're good, but last year they were elite defensively, right? And now they're only pretty good defensively, and they just do not have the offense to keep up with that. The receivers, I don't know why people expected their receivers to get better. I mean, they had real drop issues last year. They didn't get separation last year. And then when you have a quarterback who's not going to help them out very much in Jarrett Doege, it's really just showed itself. So There's no reason whatsoever that they should have lost that game against Maryland. But then the way that they played, they really shouldn't have been in it in the first place. So to me, that bottom three is pretty secure. You've got Texas Tech, you got Oklahoma State, and you got West Virginia.
I think TCU fans would agree with you on Texas Tech's offense, and Texas Tech fans are now understanding why TCU fans were so frustrated with Sonny Cumbie for the last few years, because of his just simple refusal to make in-game adjustments that will probably work. Let's go with Melissa. Give me your bottom three, and then Levi, give me your bottom three, and we'll move on to the next three from there.
So if you're telling me that Skylar Thompson's going to miss significant time, I think that you put Kansas State as number 9. I think it's kind of a toss-up with, Tech, West Virginia, K-State, Oklahoma State. None of them have shown you anything to give you a lot of confidence going forward if Skylar Thompson is out. So I go Kansas State, and then probably Texas Tech. And, I almost feel bad. I don't ever feel bad for the Red Raiders, but I almost feel bad because we knew there were not a tear shed when he left TCU. We knew what they were in for. And I think I agree with Shehan. I think it's West Virginia just hasn't given us anything to get us all that excited about what they're capable of. To me, they were the biggest question mark coming into the season. I didn't know what to expect. But they have just they just haven't put together anything that makes you feel like that this team can be really competitive in the Big 12.
I'm pretty much in agreement with Melissa. I think Kansas, without Skylar Thompson, Kansas State is so limited. I mean, I'm going to put them. I'm going to put them at 9. I'll put Tech at 8. And I think I haven't actually gotten to watch West Virginia play, but from what I've been reading and stuff like that, is it just I saw a bunch of West Virginia fans that basically described the first game as it's like they got off the bus from the last game and went straight to the next one, and that's just what happened. They're just no better than they were. So I'll put West Virginia at 7.
They're no better than they were, but instead of playing Maryland, they played the Long Island Sharks, which I didn't know was a football team until Saturday.
New York football team, man.
Honestly, they may not have known that they were a football team.
Fair enough. I think for me, I think I agree with Shehan that Texas Tech is a pretty clear 9 at this point. Defensively, they're just not where they need to be. Offensively, it feels like they're in shambles just 2 weeks into the season. And I don't see a path to them getting better, even if people stay healthy. And I think that's a more significant long-term issue than Kansas State just being without Skylar Thompson. There are some adjustments that you can make for having a backup quarterback in the game. You've still got Deuce Vaughn, a pretty good defense. But for Texas Tech, it just feels like there are a lot more question marks, even if you have all of the bodies you expected to have. So for me, Texas Tech at number 9, shout out to Sonny Cumbie. Number 8, Kansas State, because like Melissa said, if Skylar Thompson is down for a long time, that just totally dissolves any kind of offense stability that they were going to have. And I don't think they're going to be able to do much. 7 for me is Oklahoma State. I know that Spencer Sanders was out the first week with COVID. I know that they've lost Dylan Stoner and Tylan Wallace and Chuba Hubbard all from the offense last year. But you kind of expect an Oklahoma State to reload, and they just simply haven't yet.
Right.
And I know that it was his first game, but Spencer Sanders did not look good on Saturday. And I'm curious to see how that offense gets better moving forward. So that leaves 6, 5, and then 4. Shehan, back to you.
All right. I have K-State, like you mentioned, without Skylar Thompson at number 6. I saw this movie last year. It was not a good movie. I would not rent it again, but apparently we're in for it all over again. They are a good enough team outside of quarterback that I think that's probably the path, right? If they can lean on their defense, but I don't know if they're as good defensively as they were last year. They're probably a half a step below that. And it just sucks. We saw what they could do. We saw what Deuce Vaughn could do with Skylar Thompson in the game. The other thing that I am a little worried about when it comes to Kansas State this year is I'm not that surprised that Stanford was just who the hell is Deuce Vaughn and why is he running so fast? I don't know if the Big 12 is going to be quite as taken aback by him. I think that, we really saw early in the year, right? Like he exploded and teams did not know what hit him, right? Because they get him the ball in different ways. They love him on that angle route. They love him getting him out in the flat and stuff like that. And I just don't think that's going to be as there, especially as teams kind of prepare for Kansas State with Will Howard instead. So I've got them at 6. I think it's a real testament to how poor the Big 12 looks right now that I'm like, well, at least Baylor looked really good against an FCS team and Texas State, and they're 5 now. But that's where we're at. They've showed me no data, and that's better than everybody else. That's basically where we're at right now. I will say their offensive line, it's against nobody's. I don't want to say that they've manhandled anybody because it doesn't matter. Their offensive line is executed at a really high level. Actually, the last 2 weeks they've been Pro Football Focus's #1 ranked offensive line, which I don't know what that means. That seems a little. Does
anybody know what any of Pro Football Focus's grades mean?
Especially the offensive line stuff. I don't know what we're doing here. Apparently they just love wide zone because that's what they did with Jacob Gall, the Baylor starting center last year. He was the #1 rated lineman in the country at Buffalo. So whatever. I don't know. But I do think that their offensive line has showed a lot. I've been pretty impressed with what Gary Bohannon's done in the intermediate passing game. I think that's the angle I wanted to see from them. And I mean, he did prove against Texas Southern that he can throw the long ball. I don't think that means anything, but defensively they are killers, man. They are really, really good. They're going to push for, I think, being one of the top defense in the Big 12. So yeah, by fact of just existing and not tripping over their feet, they're number 5. And speaking of existing and tripping over their feet and still not even falling below this, I've still got Texas at 4 because that's just where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have a real hard time choosing between Oklahoma State and Baylor for that next bottom tier spot. But I think Sean's right. Listen, I doubt any of the other 3 of us have watched a snap of Baylor football, right, this year because
hey, I subscribe to ESPN Plus. By the way, I don't think that I dropped in my alma mater when I did jump on here, but I think you can.
Oh, we all know. We all know. But I think you're right. I think it's for being able to do what they're supposed to do against garbage teams. Yeah, Baylor gets that. Oklahoma State just looks so bad. It's just so uncharacteristically bad. And we kind of knew that one of those teams was going to have to fall off because you knew there'd be some improvement by somebody else. And so I go Oklahoma State and then I go Baylor. Hopefully that doesn't last long. And then
I don't think it will. They play Kansas, then they get Iowa State, then they're going to fall down a lot.
Well, but that's the thing with Baylor is that Oklahoma State has a veteran coach that has been doing this for a really, really long time and has habitually reloaded and just looks like an utter and complete disaster. Baylor is in the rebuild from their rebuild and looks well coached and are executing what they're supposed to execute and are putting a young quarterback, inexperienced quarterback in a position to be successful. So you automatically go, well, at least Baylor is the mullet is choking off Mike Gundy, or it's not even there anymore. She can't even use an excuse. It's choking off his oxygen or something. I don't know what's happening. Well, we all know what's happening with him, but
it's just going crazy with the score.
Yeah, I know. I've got power at the back. Is of course there's been a lot going on.
He's losing his mind.
Yeah. He has thoughts on Mike Gundy, and he wants.
It's actually Morse code. He's telling us.
Listen, I mean, I was told obviously that the last 4 years was a lot about the aggrievement of losing something of old, and so Mike Gundy.
Yeah, Mike Gundy. Yeah. There you go. And then behind, in front of that, does Texas deserve to be put in a better position than teams that are 2-0 after the way that they got beat? Well, no, but we all fall into this trap with Texas, right? Is that we just automatically assume that they're going to be better because they're Texas. So yeah, there's me just falling in line with everybody else. And now he's growling at me because I've taken a squeaky toy away.
And I will mention, right? I will mention real quick, right? If we're ranking these teams in the country right now, I think that usually when you're looking at top 1 through 5, you're looking at two top 10 teams. You're looking at a top 20-ish team and then a couple of borderline ranked teams. We're looking at a top 5 team, a top 12 team, and then a borderline top 30 team, and then the 55th best team. So that's when we rank these teams, right? Texas being at 4th is not saying oh, they're like a normal Big 12 fourth. This is like, oh, they just happen to be fourth.
We are so screwed. We are screwed.
They're fourth because 5 and 6 are worse, and that's why. I'm gonna put Oklahoma State at 6. I'll put Oklahoma State at 6. Their defense is pretty good. The offense, that I don't know. I'm tempted to put them up ahead of Baylor just because I think I feel like eventually their offense is going to figure something out. Like, I mean, Mike Gundy's has a track record of good offense. I mean, that's his deal.
He's been watching a lot of OAN though, and I don't know if they do, like if they have football schematic shows or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
So the one thing,
it's just a lot of like inside zone and like wishbone stuff. It's all conservative.
I mean, not to go back down to no comment. Not to go back down to the bottom three for a second, but like. That's what everybody was telling me about Neil Brown. It's like, oh, they got the defense figured out. Neil Brown is an offensive wizard, so they're going to figure it out. And, like, what are we in, like, year 4? Like, they still haven't figured it out. Like, 3. Okay. In fairness to him, year 3. But, like, they haven't improved at all, right? Like, this is basically the same team that took the field in 2019. And, like, for me, I call it the Jim McElwain effect, which is when your team is awesome.
Humping a shark?
Nothing to do with sharks. Although they did play the Sharks and they did, get up all up on them. So, there's that. But if your team is awesome because the side of the ball that your coach does not coach is really good, then maybe that's not about your head coach. And that's the point that I'm starting to get at with West Virginia. And I'm worried that we're going to start getting there with Oklahoma State.
I agree with that. At some point, things have to shift and change if things aren't working. And Oklahoma State hasn't been inside I'd say the top 3 of the Big 12 in really truly maybe the last 5 years. They've always kind of started out near there at the beginning of the season, and then they've never stepped fully into that space. And so you have to start asking questions about how viable is it to continue to have Mike Gundy. Of course, there's always also the grass is greener on the other side, argument to make. You've got a great head coach. He's, been successful in the past, yada, yada. TCU's having the same conversation right now too. Other schools across the country are having the same conversation, or they're firing their head coach 2 games in. That kind of, we're going to get there in a second. For me, I have West Virginia at 6 just because I had Oklahoma State at 7. They can't occupy 2 spots. I have Texas at 5. And I have Texas at 5 because they beat a decent Louisiana team who struggled this Saturday as well. And then they just got absolutely housed by Arkansas, and you don't get rewarded for getting housed by Arkansas. As a childhood Arkansas fan, you don't get rewarded for that. So I have Texas at 5. They've got a brewing quarterback controversy now with Casey Thompson starting against Rice. Who knows if Hudson Card's going to get back in there? He probably will. Sark talked about his happy feet, making some bad decisions, his movement in the pocket, throwing timing off in the Arkansas game. So, freshman, it kind of expected to make some of those mistakes, but we'll see how all of that bears out over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it takes. But for now, I've got Texas at 5, and I have Baylor at 4. As much as it pains me, I like Jared Bohannon. I don't think he's going to be an elite RG3 style quarterback, probably not even a Charlie Brewer style quarterback, but he looks calm and composed. And I know it's not 2 games to really write home about, Baylor's first 2 opponents, but he managed the game. They won by big margins, which is what you're supposed to do against an FCS school, a low FBS school. So why not? Baylor's 2-0. It means they've got one more win in the win column than Texas does. I've got the Bears at 4.
And one last thing just to touch on Baylor is that I feel like, especially in that first game, the offensive staff did a good job of because the margin wasn't very big, right? It was 29-20. It wasn't really as close as that, but I felt like they did a good job of trying to make the game difficult for Bohannon in his first game, just in terms of this is the kind of read you're going to have to make. This is the kind of throw you're going to have to make. And so it was like they knew that they were going to win the game, obviously, and that they could turn something on if they really wanted to. So I liked that they did that they kind of made him make these intermediate throws. I think that there's a level there that we haven't seen with him in terms of the deep passing and making the game easier back again. We won't see it this week because they're playing Kansas, but then once they play Iowa State, I'm very curious to see. I consider myself cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, that Iowa State defense is going to be a really big test for a quarterback in his 4 start. Yeah, it truly is.
A lot of quarterbacks.
Say what you will about warm-up games, they don't really push you the way that you need to be pushed going into a matchup against the defense like you're going to see against Iowa State. So that's definitely something to watch in a couple of weeks, as well as how Bohannon and the rest of that offense fares against what we've already talked about is probably one of the best defenses in the country. Final top 3.
Levi, you better hurry up and get your tent orders in quick because it's a 2:30 start.
I did my diligence. I put my article out in July. And I said, you guys need to figure this out now. And whatever, and the Cyclone Equipment retweeted and said, we're on it. So if they didn't do it, it is not my fault.
I love it.
Let's go ahead and give me your final 3, 3, 2, 1 in the Big 12. Shehan, go for it.
Yeah. So I will say I'm going to start with 1. It's Oklahoma. Obviously, I think that they're just so much better than everybody else right this second. Things can change. I think that between 2 and 3, I think it's pretty close right now. I'm going to put Iowa State 2, though. I think that they still are the best team. Look, they struggled against Iowa. I think a lot of teams are going to struggle against Iowa this year. I think Iowa's a top 10 team. I'm not going to penalize them too much for losing that game. TCU, I was hoping I'd see a little more from that offense against
you and me both.
That makes 3 of us.
And actually, because obviously I wasn't thrilled with what I saw, especially in the first half offensively. Is the secondary going to be an issue? Like
if people don't get healthy, I mean, you look at number 9, CJ Caesar. He's a 3rd string corner.
Yeah,
and he's in there because of injuries. If people don't get healthy, that's going to continue to be a problem.
I mean, this is the second year in a row that they've been down at CJ Caesar getting a lot of snaps. I mean, it's a little concerning, right? I thought that they were going to be able to kind of plug and play just with the numbers that they had. I thought that some of the names that I'd heard in terms of underclassmen coming through, I thought we were going to see some more of those guys, right? And I don't know. They haven't really lived up to expectations so far. I still think that TC's obviously going to be fine defensively, but they have looked defensively worse than I expected them to look through the first couple of weeks against a Cal offense that is terrible, by the way. Yeah. Just a very bad Cal offense. And then offensively, hey, I know you're excited to have Sonny Cumbie gone, but looks softly similar.
I'll say this. I think the problem, the offense looks different. The execution looks similar. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a much more effective offense and one that can maximize the strength of its best players. What we're still seeing is that Max Duggan is not an elite thrower of the football. Guys were running wide open past a really good Cal defense. I mean, there were probably 6 balls that should have been 40-plus yard passes, and all of them were just bad throws. So that to me is the concern. Yeah.
I mean, listen, we don't need to we don't need to say Parker 3 times to get him on the program, obviously, but like it's concerning to me, right? Like, now, the one thing that you say is that Zach looks as good as everybody expected him to look. I think the offensive line has generally held up pretty well. I think that Johnson has looked pretty solid, but the players haven't made each other better yet, I feel like. Yeah. And when you're looking at an 11-man offense, right? Like that's really what I need to see. I need to see the offense become complementary. I need to see, because teams are starting to focus in on that running game, I need to see them take advantage of it. And I think that I certainly picked TCU as a dark horse sort of team to get into that Big 12 title game. I haven't seen it so far. I think it's still there. I think that the pieces have showed themselves, but I've been a little disappointed through the first 2 weeks.
Well, and I'm going to put TCU at 3 too, mostly by default at this point. My concern as a TCU person is that like CJ Caesar is okay when they're getting to the quarterback. We saw him be okay against Oklahoma State and Kansas and Louisiana. Now, again, competition level, whatever. But Oklahoma State's pretty damn good. But there's absolutely been zero pressure. And this was the defensive line that we were told was the D line to end all D lines. And they have been completely and totally inept when it comes to pressuring the quarterback. And now Kari Coleman comes back against SMU. Maybe that helps things a little bit. He was a difference maker last year, but I don't feel confident with TCU at 3 whatsoever, which is why I confidently put Iowa State at 2. Like you said, I'm not going to punish them for losing that game to Iowa. I was disappointed in how they showed up, and most of the mistakes were self-issued. But that's also part of being a team with a target on your back for the first time. It's the old Gary Patterson saying of, in year 1, you get to prove them wrong, but then you got to go and prove them right. And Iowa State is facing the reality of having to prove people right. I think they'll bounce back. I still think they're going to be the toughest out next to Oklahoma in the conference. And if they can fix some of these very fixable issues, they have a shot to push Oklahoma for a Big 12 championship this year. It's a nice thing about losing to your biggest rival. You can wipe that slate clean, move on. It doesn't affect the fortunes the rest of the way. I still am not 100% a believer in Spencer Rattler, but it's just really hard to look around the conference right now and pick a quarterback that's playing better than him. And he has more talent than any other quarterback in the country. They've got a better, more offensive line talent. The defense is still very, very concerning, but the talent is certainly there. And Alex Grinch, I think, has a scheme that can get them to make stops when they need to. And if you have that kind of offense, all you have to do is make stops when you need to. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, that battle for 3, 4, 5, I think could be really, really close the rest of the way. And this is going to be one of those years where the Big 12 is just such kind of a crapshoot that we're going to see some weird results, and we're going to have a big jumble in the middle of the pack.
Mm-hmm. Levi.
I'm kind of follow the consensus here a little bit. I have not gotten to watch a lot of TCU yet.
You're lucky.
But just talking to a few people about it or whatever, it seems like some of the offensive line issues from not as bad as last year, but they're still there. The ghosts of them are still there. I like Max Duggan. I think he's a really interesting player. I think he's a pretty good player. I've always kind of had as far as the passing stuff goes, I've been a little bit on the doubtful side, because I want to see it, I guess, because I haven't seen him. They haven't really tested him necessarily. So I guess because there's so many questions left with TCU, and there's a lot of room left to improve there. I mean, they put him at 3. The great part about so Iowa State would be at 2. The great part about Iowa State is the thing that travels everywhere you go is defense, and Iowa State's defense is ridiculously good. And that's going to show up all the time. People are doubling Will McDonald, and it just doesn't matter. He's getting to the quarterback all the time. Mike Rose is still having Jake Hummel's having a career season so far. Orion Vance didn't even play last game, and nobody noticed. Greg Eisworth is having a really good season. Isheem Young is a human artillery shell. Anthony Johnson's having a good season. Datrone Young is playing better. I'm still not a Datrone Young fan, but he's playing better. TJ Tampa's right behind him. He's playing a lot more, and it seems like he's starting to take that over. I really like him as a second corner, which was kind of the spot left on the defense that we weren't 100% sure about, was that second corner, and that spot is starting to get filled. So, but on the other side of the ball, you've still got Breece Hall. You've still got Charlie Kohler for whatever he can give. It sounds like his health is kind of a little bit up in the air. Like not that he's not going to play, it's just whether he's going to be able to be at 100% this season. You still have those pieces. So if they can at least get the running game going, you have a pretty high floor just based on the defense and the running game. If Purdy figures it out, great. Then obviously we're back in business. We're shooting for 10-11-1 type of season, trying to give Oklahoma everything they got in the Big 12 championship game, and who knows, maybe a backdoor into the playoffs. Not necessarily. That's more of a cherry. Getting into the playoff is more of a cherry on top thing. It always kind of was. The goal number 1 was to win the Big 12 title. So you still have all that, and we'll see how everything looks beyond this week. Like how Purdy looks this weekend could change things a little bit. You could have fluctuation where maybe they drop down and maybe they go back up. Who knows? But then Oklahoma, I mean, I've never actually, even just of what I watch him, he's really good. I mean, he's really talented. It's no denying that. I'm not 100%. I'm also not 100% actually sold on Spencer Rattler. I think there's some immaturity there, like a lot of immaturity there. And I don't know. His arm talent is impressive. He's a really good runner. He does all of the tangible things really, really well. I have my doubts about him as a leader, as far as a guy that can be the dude on a football team. He seems like I was trying to think. I had a good metaphor for this picked out earlier. He's kind of like, I don't know. He is he's a really talented player that's got all of the tools in the toolbox. He's just not the guy that you want taking the last shot at the end of the game, if that makes sense, in my opinion, or whatever. Like he's not that to say not that I'm saying that there would be a quarterback that I would take over him, like if I needed a drive at the end of the game, but he's not a guy that I would like feel comfortable with, I guess. Like I feel like he can be rattled easily with a defense that's really good and a defense that takes away his first or second option. I think you can get in his head. And that's what worries me about Spencer Rattler.
Yeah, Spencer rattled her.
Yeah, I
Got
was
him.
thinking it.
C minus.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Of all of the quarterbacks in the Big 12, I think I agree with Melissa that I like Spencer the most. But we saw him throw 2 picks against Tulane in week 1. He's still just a sophomore, right?
Right.
And, like in postgame against Cal, we got to talk to Quentin Johnson a little bit, also a sophomore. And he said something that I think we can also apply to Spencer Rattler. He was talked about, someone asked him about his work ethic and his mentality coming into this season, trying to build off of a pretty good freshman year. And he said, even though I'm just a sophomore, I'm trying to grow more as a leader and set an expectation for how we work around here, so that when the freshmen come in, transfers come in, whoever comes in, they see the way that I work, and that's kind of the expectation for them as well. And I wonder if the same thing could be said for Spencer Rattler, who in just his second year is still really kind of learning how to be that leader. So I kind of tend to give him, especially, young players all across the country, I tend to give them a little bit of a break when it comes to that leadership aspect of things and really focus more on their on-field performance. Spencer is a great athlete. There's no doubt about that. He's arguably the best quarterback in the country. Those picks against Tulane are concerning. Knowing some of the defenses and the secondaries in the Big 12, that could become an issue for Oklahoma down the road. Obviously, they're 1. I've got Iowa State 2. I've got TCU 3. Max Duggan, it's year 3, buddy. You got to start making throws. You got to start making big plays. Otherwise, the offense is going to continue to stall out. I will say this, as far as play calling for TCU is concerned, why are we forcing him to play to his weakness? We know that he's not accurate beyond 30, 35, 40 yards, but he is lights out 8 to 20 yards downfield. And we saw that on Saturday. He was very good in the intermediate passing game. He's clearly the most confident when he's throwing those routes. We saw Quentin turn one of those routes into a 45-yard touchdown. If that plus Zach Evans isn't the foundation for your offense, then what are we actually doing? Is really more my question than anything else.
That is the question that at least 9 teams in the Big 12 raise. Like, what are we actually doing? What are we
really doing here? What would you say that you do here to all of the offense?
Here's a question. In the Big 12, how many teams outside of Oklahoma would you say have their offensive identity established?
0. Except for
right
Kansas, and their offensive identity is nothing.
So I think
their offensive identity is running Bean. Basically,
right. Help.
I think that that K-State with Thompson knows their identity.
That's but now though they don't.
Now they don't.
Right.
I
think I would say no. I think they know what they want their identity to be. It just hasn't been that yet. I think that's probably the closest answer you got. Maybe.
I'll give credit to the bum slayers over at Baylor, man. They know what they want to be. We'll see if they can do it against anybody who has a pulse.
That's fair. That's true. Fair. Yeah, that's fair.
True. Yeah, I think the first couple weeks of the season, unless you're playing anybody of significance, all of those questions are still realistic.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna finish with a couple of national topics, 30 seconds each. I want to hear from you guys on these topics. The first one being Clay Helton was just fired by USC. Give me like a 3-word recap of his tenure at USC, and then give me a name to replace him. Shehan, let's start with you.
Man with hat. And I remember a couple of years. This is like back in 2018. Like, this is how long we've been going at this. He was actually the second highest tenured coach in the Pac-12, only behind David Shaw. That's where we were at with this.
Wild.
I looked up a picture of him once without a hat, and I'm like, there is zero chance I would have recognized that man walking down the street. But so my pick, I know that it's been rumored forever, but I really thinking more and more about it, that it makes a lot of sense, and that's James Franklin. And the reason that I say that is because I think that James Franklin has reached the peak of what he can be at Penn State. And I think that peak is really high. I mean, he won Big Ten titles at a program that if somebody like him didn't take it over, I think could have fallen back to the pack in college football. That said, I think that at USC, the ceiling is higher. You don't have as obvious a roadblock like you have with Ohio State. I think that recruiting there is a lot easier. And the other thing that I love about James Franklin in that role too is that he's going to come in. Yes, he's going to recruit at a really high level, which USC hasn't done consistently. And I think they need somebody who will do that. But I think he's also somebody who's proven that like he can do the off-field things too, in terms of like, we need this facility. We need this donor to do this thing. Like, I need to keep these people happy and these people need to keep me happy, right? And so I think that a lot of the other candidates who are named, unless you literally get, I saw somebody throw out Bob Stoops, which doesn't make any dang sense to me. But you know, if you are looking for a coach, if you're looking for a hire, I'm looking for a couple things. I'm looking for a guy who's going to recruit at that elite level, because I think that that's the biggest thing USC's missed. I want somebody who has an identity as a coach, and I want somebody who understands what they need to do off the field as much as what they need to do on the field. And I mean, James Franklin has had a lot of really good players committed who then were like, do I really want to play at Penn State? And then they go to the SEC or something like that. I think that happens a lot less if he's the head coach at USC.
I definitely agree with that. Melissa, what about you?
He's still there would be my 3 words. I cannot believe that he lasted this long. Clay Helton did, especially when the Pac-12 has been so up for grabs for the last several seasons. I had absolutely zero faith, having watched a little bit of Stanford against Kansas State, that they were going to do anything against USC at USC. And from the first series, it's like, well, this is a much better team than USC is today, right now, at this moment. So I have a pick. I have a realistic pick, and then I have something that just kind of popped into my head that I think might actually happen. I think that their ideal situation, if they want to go out and get a guy in the college game, is probably Joe Moorhead. He's going to be the hot name at coordinator at the end of the year, probably, if Oregon keeps playing the way that they're playing. I mean, he took a leftover cast off from Boston College and turned him into a guy that could win at Ohio State. Like, I mean, he wasn't a great quarterback at BC. I think Anthony Brown.
Anthony Brown.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't a great quarterback at BC, and came out, and they designed an offense that worked with his skill set and made him into a world beater. But also, just as a thought, Urban Meyer just has looked more unhappy on the sidelines of an NFL game than I've ever seen anyone look. Would anyone be shocked if he only lasted a year in the pro game? No. And if that job was open and Urban Meyer, suddenly the stress of the NFL was too much for him and he was sick again, could totally see him. The warm weather and the climate in Los Angeles is very favorable for people with health issues. I'm just throwing that out there.
But the pollution.
Levi, what's your 30-second take?
I'm going to feel super dirty for saying this, but my guy, the first thing I saw when I saw the initial tweet from Pete Thamel, my gut was like, they're going to hire PJ Fleck. They're going to do it. No, just listen.
No.
Because my 3-word sentence for what describes the Clay Helton tenure is, I don't care. I grew up watching the 2000s USC teams with Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Lindale White, all of those guys. They were electric. Mike Williams. I mean, that was like the team of the 2000s. And I do not care about USC. I don't remember the last time I gave them a passing thought because they are so boring and uninteresting. I do not care to watch them. That is, you can't say that about almost any other Pac-12 team. I don't care about USC. And I don't think I'm alone. Outside of a national college football writer and someone that lives on the West Coast, who gives a shit about USC? Like, nobody outside the Pac-12 cares about USC except for Notre Dame, I guess, or whatever. Like, their brand is taking a huge hit right now because they're really uninteresting and they don't win the Pac-12. They're not bad enough for anybody to make jokes about them, but they're not good enough for anybody to care. So what do they need? They need national recognition. So you know whose entire deal is this big charlatan game of marketing and smoke and mirrors? PJ Fleck. The dude is a marketing machine. Even if he's a terrible football coach, he's a marketing machine. And if there's ever a coach more qualified to coach in Hollywood than a guy that is actually not that great of a football coach but can recruit and is a really good marketer, it's freaking PJ Fleck. And USC is going to botch this, and that's who they're going to hire, and it's going to be a big, stupid mess. I'm going to be talking about this again in 3 years.
I love it. Here's my question. How perfect of a candidate would Lane Kiffin be if he hadn't already coached there?
So I understand why you guys are saying sort of sizzle names, right? But like, you're USC. Like, USC doesn't have to hide. Like you said, smoke and mirrors. I understand that there's going to be like some, oh, I'm excited by that. But like, I don't think they have to hire a smoke and mirrors candidate. And I don't think they have to think that way, right? They do need to think about somebody.
They don't have to.
They are going to think about somebody who's going to make them matter. But that's why I think that like, they're going to try to go splash, right? Like, they're going to try to do what Texas did last year and be like, we hired like the national championship winning coordinator, right? Like, they want something
Bill O'Brien. They're going to hire Bill O'Brien.
I mean, I've
Mike McCarthy
thrown out, which is something. But like, I do feel like they need somebody who does have flash, but like, they also need somebody who is proven, because like that's the thing with the
Urban Meyer.
Urban Meyer.
I mean, no, in Urban,
immediate
right,
storylines.
If they can get him, that makes sense, right? But like, for me, that's why like the Moorhead thing, I just don't see it, because like he had a stint as a head coach and it didn't go well, right? And so like they can't feel like they're selling, like taking a chance, right? They need to sell something that they know that they can sell, and I just don't. That's why I like Franklin, because I feel like Franklin is like, we got the coach from Penn State. Can you guys believe this?
I tend to agree with all of that. Here's how I think this might play out for USC though. Lane Kiffin, obviously not going to be hired there. I think that Dante Williams is going to come in and get USC to the Pac-12 championship against Oregon, and they're going to play a close game, and God forbid they win that football game. Does USC just hire the interim head coach and make him the full-time guy?
No.
Yeah.
They've done that before, haven't they? Didn't work.
I don't know. We'll see. Moving on. They did just do that with not Todd Helton, Clay Helton.
Todd Helton.
There's also something to be
Colorado
said for this slow arising trend of good coaches realizing that the pasture is not always greener on the other side of the fence, and not moving on. I'm thinking of guys like Matt Campbell or Luke Fickell, or there's a few other guys, or Jamie Chadwell, or there's a bunch of guys. Now that's not to say that Jamie Chadwell won't move on, because he's still a newer up and coming name, but there's the rise of people just taking little stepping stones all the way up is slowing down a lot. People are not jumping around like they used to. James Franklin may see, well, I can win 10 games a year at Penn State, and be like, let's do it. To win 10 games a year, maybe you upset Ohio State here and there and you make it in, then you can do that or whatever. Or you can, maybe you can go to USC and maybe it'll work. But if not, then your career is that and you're back to your coaching Vanderbilt.
But to me, this is where, like, being the only West Coast person here, like everybody, that grows up in the Midwest or in like bigger football places thinks of Penn State a certain way. I don't know that James Franklin is really moving the needle for people if USC hires him. We all know that he's a hell of a football coach. We all know what he's done.
I don't think he's a sexy hire at all.
No, I don't think he's a sexy hire.
He's
not
a sexy
for
man,
people
though.
here.
Let's be honest.
He is a very, very good
good-looking
guy.
guy.
Let me ask that, right? Like, what is a sexy hire in an area that doesn't actually like college football?
The answer is there isn't one. There isn't. There is. That's the kind of the thing is. There is no sexy hire unless you're a mid-tier program and you can hire one of these hot names like a Jamie Chadwell or something like that. There is no sexy name outside of that tier.
So that's how I feel like for me, right? Like, they're not trying to sell the guy in, whatever, somewhere in California, right? I think that they're more trying to sell people in the football world.
Yeah.
Well, 100%.
They're going to look at, the 49ers staff. They're going to look at the Rams staff. They're going to look for a professional
Sean McVay's
hire.
friends. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I've got one.
They're going to hire Cliff Kingsbury.
USC head coach, Pete Carroll.
Love to see it. Love to see it. That name sounds familiar. 30 seconds on this next one. And we're coach. Hang on. I'm going to put this comment up because it's excellent.
Kenny Kane, TCU legend.
Thank you, Kenny Kane. Coach Prime.
Thank you for not using his first name, which is forbidden.
Yeah, we do. No,
from Bolton. How about USC head coach Kenny Kane? I could get behind that.
I'm here for it.
Moving on, though, we all saw. I don't know. I say we all saw. There was a tweet that went out today about a Florida State offensive lineman proposing to his girlfriend on the sideline right after this massive loss to Jacksonville State. and he was catching a lot of flack on Twitter. I'll tell you how I feel in a second, but I want to hear from you guys. What's your response to something like that? See it.
Good for him.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is very simply, my family and friends all came in the game to see me do this, and I'm not going to not do this because we lost a football game.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's just sports. Getting married is a lot bigger.
This is a decision that will hopefully stretch a lot longer than his football career. So, you know, good luck to him, and yeah, put that first.
So,
Absolutely.
As the only female on the show, it is the only single person on the show, I'm just going to say this. Don't propose to your girlfriend at a sporting event.
But
Okay,
if you're
if
you're in the sporting event,
I feel like, there's scenarios, right? Because
so you're telling me, what if you're like Ian Johnson's girlfriend after the Fiesta Bowl?
But that was spontaneous, right? Like that was
At a sporting event.
Yeah, but here's the difference. You cannot plan to go to a game, like, because this lineman obviously thought, oh, Jacksonville State, we got this, no big deal. No, like if something amazing happens and in that moment you're so full of joy and love and your heart just says, I want to marry this woman. Like if Ian Johnson proposes to me, fine, great. But if you put my name up on that's
a little different.
But but no, if you just lost the first time since 1959 to an FCS school and really just set your program back a decade, like I understand why he did it. He absolutely should have done it. He shouldn't have planned to do it. That's where I have a problem.
So I think that it's always going to be right. Like stadium proposals are usually dumb, right? Like doing something in the crowd, doing something on the video board, that's really good, right? I think that the exception to it is if there's something like tying you to that game. If you met at a
right, yeah. If she was like a cheerleader, or if she was something like that, or tied with the Olympic program.
I don't know the
exceptions.
Girls' background. Yeah, but like he's a football player. I'm sure that that's a huge part of their story. I'm sure that I'm sure that like that stadium is a big part of their story, and you know all that sort of stuff, right?
Do it at practice proposals are adorable.
Practice?
There was one.
No.
We talk about
the walk-on getting a scholarship.
We're not talking about a game. We're talking about practice.
I don't know about.
Come on.
No, there was one the other day that was so precious. Like it was going around Twitter in August. It was cute.
So so all that to say, like I feel like it works if it's like a private moment, right? Like the Ian Joss thing aside, right? Like if it's a private moment, which that was.
It was
a private moment that the guy posted on his own social media and then just got picked up and kind of blown out of proportion, right?
Right.
So like I have no problem with it if it's because like again, it was a moment between them. It was something he planned, and like
at a stadium that holds 80,000 people, but totally private moment. It's fine.
But it's not like he put it up on the video board. He didn't do it in midfield. He did it after the game, off to the side when everybody else was going.
Everybody got to come to the game and see him play. Like that's. I mean, we've never none of us played college football, right? Like, what kind of moment must that be to be like, man,
right?
All of my family and friends came to see me, and like I got to do something huge. And like I want to cap it off, and like
something
and you don't know.
That hadn't been done in like 60 years. So,
but like
once in a lifetime,
are they going to remember getting engaged?
Yeah,
more than they're going to remember.
That's the
they're
thing.
Going to be like, that was a funny story. Remember when you guys lost on like that terrible thing, but then we got engaged, so it was all okay. Like
and then she can make jokes like way down the line. They're like, "Wow, we've been together by as many points as you lost by that game."
Come on, David. Come on.
We're gonna stop mansplaining proposals now. Move right on. I will say this: I'm happy for them.
I'm extremely happy for them. Absolutely.
That's like you've all said. This is going to last.
It's a funny story. That's all it is.
Than the football career. As a person, by the way, whose proposal, I knew that I was going to propose one night, and so I had like family and friends waiting at another place to celebrate afterwards, which was nice because then it made me actually do it. Right.
Yeah. Right. Then you have to do it. Yeah.
You have to do it because you got like 50 people waiting for you somewhere else. So I understand that logistic of it too, like inviting family and friends, bringing them all in for this occasion and kind of going from there. At a football game, maybe not. We did it at a restaurant. So there you go. But before we get into the final thing, which is I want to hear what the game you're looking forward to most for week 3. Did you guys see that cat get saved by the American flag at the Miami game?
Yes.
Phenomenal.
Amazing.
Have you ever seen it? That was so wild.
Best catch by a Miami wide receiver since like 1999. So
I'm just like, the thing that confused me is that like I saw the video obviously and I saw it happen. I like read the athletic story afterwards. And I know that there's no way to answer the question, but like just the like how did a cat get on a string in the third level? Like, I feel like that was just my like.
They get on the field more than you think. Like, it's kind of weird.
No, I get that, but like, why did it? Like, how did it end up there? Like, how did it even end up grabbing onto something? Like, I'm just very confused. I'm more confused about it than anything else.
I'm just glad the cat's okay.
Yeah.
I'm just glad the cat's okay.
Yeah, yep, cat's good.
Stadium cats are a thing. I'm sure they eat tons of leftover nachos and mice, but glad that cat got escorted off by stadium workers, and hopefully,
that cat was surprisingly thin for potentially living in that stadium. Like, athletic.
If I lived in a stadium, I would not look like that. But
oh my God. Yeah,
I don't live in a stadium and I don't look like that.
My body would be 45% cheese.
My body is.
It's already 32% cheese.
Yeah. 38% barbecue, 45% cheese. I don't know what the other part.
Do the rest of the math there.
Yeah. Nope, I'm not. I'm moving on. The final thing for the night. Give me the one game you're looking forward to in week 3 across the college football landscape, and give me your prediction. Whoever wants to go first can go first.
Well, time to pull up the schedule.
I'll go because I actually put one in.
Yeah, you put one down, Melissa. So
yeah, I actually did.
We can hurriedly Google.
You're freaking try hard.
I'm an educator. So I think that there are actually some really intriguing games. I'm not interested with the Florida, Alabama, or whatever, because we all know how that's going to go. That doesn't intrigue me. But the one that I want to see is Indiana, Cincinnati. Indiana just got boathoused in week 1, but now we know that Iowa's pretty damn good, so we're not as worried.
You can mix your metaphors there, bud.
Yeah, well, listen, at some point during the show,
got gently.
Well, you know what they say about glass houses? Glass houses sink ships.
Listen, at some
got set away in the Hamptons.
Boat race. Listen, I somehow pulled something in my back during the show, and so I like the pain is just radiating through my body right now, and so like anything that I'm saying I cannot be held responsible for. But so they got houseboated, whatever. There was a diving board. I don't know. So, but we know that that's okay now. I still don't know that Indiana is as good as we all thought that they might be. But for Cincinnati, this is a big time prove it game. I mean, you're coming in as a top 10 program. You're playing a Big Ten team that a lot of people thought was maybe a potential dark horse to make the Big Ten championship, which now know is probably not going to be the case. Can they assert their will against the Big Ten program? As they have kind of the big national burst of, being invited to the Big 12, accepting that invitation. So I want to see what they do against that Indiana program that we all expect to be pretty good. I want to see how they look, and I want to see if they can not just win, but be in control of the game from start to finish.
Nice.
Thanks.
My game to watch this weekend is Presbyterian at Campbell.
Oh, God.
Oh, okay.
Presbyterian is averaging 70.
You want to see the bits.
Presbyterian is averaging 71 points a game on offense because they are coached by the guy that always onside kicks, always goes for 2, and always goes for it on 4th. And they are putting up crazy points against absolutely nobody of note. And Campbell, I have at least heard of. So I'm assuming it's a tough game. I have no idea.
Are you going to watch that game?
I'm not. I'm going to be drunk as shit in Vegas, but I'm going to be like, that was interesting. Fun fact, he was the high school football coach of Hunter Henry. So there you go.
So I do have to mention that, like you mentioned, not only are the first 2 games that they played nobodies, but like the second one wasn't. The
first one was against an NAIA team.
Yeah, no, the second one was against an NCCA team, a National Christian Conference Athletic Association team.
Yeah, Fort Lauderdale. Yes.
So I don't want to get too excited because.
But they won 68-3 and 84-43. I mean, they're putting points up.
What I'm going to mention is that Presbyterian is a non-scholarship football team, and Campbell is a scholarship football team. So we'll
give me Presbyterian on the money line. I don't know if there's a money line, but
I'm sure there is somewhere.
They are the Grinnell College of college football teams, and it's phenomenal.
They are. Okay.
That's a funny little small Iowa school basketball reference there.
A little inside baseball moment for you.
Yes.
So I am going to go with North Carolina versus Virginia. So North Carolina, Sam Howell, obviously a really good quarterback. Virginia's got a quarterback named Brennan Armstrong who threw for 405 yards and 5 touchdowns last week. So, and it was against Illinois, who's I think is probably only okay, but is a Big Ten football team, and he just absolutely threw all over them. So, I have no inclination to think that this game is going to be good or that either of these teams are particularly any good, but there's going to be a lot of points. And honestly, this is a pretty sucky slate, so why not?
Yeah, it's not a great slate. Now, I typed this question in before I actually looked at the schedule for week 3, so that's my bad. I think the game that I'm picking is BYU Arizona State. Arizona State has played 2 really bad football teams to start their season, but they're still ranked 19 somehow. BYU is coming off of their first win over their rival since 2009. So you have a team that we still don't know anything about versus a team that's really lined up for a pretty significant letdown game if they're not too careful. And I'm excited just to see how BYU can welcome in Arizona State and maintain the momentum that they've got now from beating Utah for the first time in 12 years.
And in the Big 12. Wonderful game.
It's a Big 12 matchup. It's so good.
I will mention that the other sort of relatively marquee game is Penn State versus Auburn. I kind of think that Auburn sucks and just displayed nobody, but people are ranking them for some reason. That'll last exactly one more week.
Alabama, Florida play this weekend too. None of us have mentioned that yet, but that's going to be like Alabama, Miami. So it's not going to be anything of note, really. That's, I think, going to do it. We've gone an hour and 25 minutes, and I told Shehan we would stay at an hour, so my apologies to you, good sir. Thank you for your time here. But this is the first Big 12 Roundtable. We're going to be doing this once a month with a special guest each time. Thank you for everyone who came and watched. Thank you for all of the comments. I didn't put all of them up, but we got quite a few. So thanks for your participation, whether you were watching on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitter. We're going to be doing this once a month. It'll be the second Monday of the month, every single month during college football season. For Melissa, Shehan, and Levi, I am Jamie Plunkett, and we will see you guys next time.